They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. David Foster Wallace, author of Infinite Jest, and perhaps our country's most gifted English language writer of the modern era, shared this story at the 2005 Kenyon College commencement. There are these two fish swimming along, and they happen to be an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" Wallace goes on to say that the point of this story isn't to position yourself as the older fish passing along wisdom to the younger generation. Rather, in his words, the most obvious important realities are often the ones that are most difficult to talk about and see. Like Wallace, I share this story with you not because it is standard for a sermon to begin with a story, continue on with cliched platitudes, and end with a profound conclusion, I hope, but to posit that which matters most to us is that which we take for granted. Stated as a question, also standard format for a sermon, and allow me to leap across several methodical logic gaps, it becomes this: if you could live your life over again, knowing what you do now, are you living the life you are meant to live? Taken further, what anchors you in reality? I raise these questions to you not just because it is customary for a minister to ask relevant questions to engage the congregation to their sacred text, although that surely is part of my intention here. I raise this because it strikes me that these questions must have been something that Jesus' apostles wondered when they heard his call to discipleship. Who are they, given their humble background, to receive this prayer? How are they able to be what Christ saw in them? What we discover, just like Wallace's parable, "This is water," is that what altered their self-perception in the course of history is so obvious that it's hard to see. And that thing which is hidden in plain sight is taken for granted in this pericope, never stated, but loudly implied, and adds intentionality and meaning to the sacred prayer. Join me in a few minutes as I try to take down the fourth wall that separates our world from that of the text, enter the narrative, and discover biblical gems hidden in plain sight. In doing so, we will find, as Wallace intones, that the most obvious important realities are the ones that are the hardest to see and talk about. I personally know this to be true because this axiom was lost on me the first 20 times I read this text. Sure, I have done my exegetical homework, the passages that precede and follow it, and its relation to John's gospel as a whole. I even delved into the pericope's literary setting, its form, life setting, each yielding clues about why the writer framed his reality in this specific format and what meaning can be derived from this text that is relevant for us today. I was so excited to share my research with you until I realized my sermon was nothing more than a New Testament grad school paper that was meant to impress the listener with the profundity of my words and oratorical skills. But then I realized that my sermon, like a prayer, can't be about the speaker. Sermons, in my view, are an art form and are also about lies. More specifically, they make us realize the lies that are all around us and guide us to a sacred space where truth is revealed. And the truth that changed their self-image and mission has meaning for us today. With that in mind, I tore up my paper and looked at this text from a variety of different perspectives. It was only when I started wondering about how Jesus' prayer impacted the apostles and their mission that I realized I was onto something unique. We encounter our story in one of the more unusual literary settings in the Gospel of John and uncover the first hidden gem. While it is clear that Jesus is in or near Jerusalem, there is a more ethereal dimension to this pericope in that time and place are suspended as the reader enters a sacred circle with the apostles. We are literally extricated from the text, placed in a realm outside time and place, and offered a prayer where Jesus tells us we are one with God as God is one with us. The full meaning and gravity of this prayer is lost in the disciples, and sometimes it can be lost on the reader today. This next observation seems meaningless until you ask yourself the following question. Who were the apostles, and what were they thinking about when they heard Jesus' call to discipleship? The best way to understand who they were is to discuss who they were not. They were not rich and well-born, famous, attractive, powerful, nor highly educated. Peter was a fisherman by trade, along with his brother Andrew, as well as James and John, ostensibly the writer of this gospel. They weren't very good ones, however, since they were always mending their nets. Matthew was a tax collector despised by his own people. Thomas always overpromised but underdelivered. Judas was literally god-awful and later replaced by Paul, a lawyer and a persecutor of Christians. The remaining apostles were of indeterminate origin and so unremarkable in their professions that they go unnamed. This is hardly a group of people someone would select to change the world irrevocably. But they did. How? What was it that gave them the agency to do that? Surely this question into their identity and background must have crossed their minds as well. All their lives, they were seen as those who lie outside the religious, political, and cultural mainstream. They were poor, ignoble, indistinct, meek, and for the most part uneducated. Yet here they stand with Jesus in a sacred circle as he reveals himself as God in human form. They listen to him pray to the Creator and note how tenderly and lovingly he speaks with them. They hear his pleas for God to protect them from evil. You can almost sense them collectively asking the question, who am I that God has chosen me? That leads us to the second gem inside this prayer. At some point, they realize this question is irrelevant. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. This prayer is meant for all of those who seek to bring about a more just and inclusive world where God's love is felt and shared by all. What the apostles also realized was this: the limitations to who they are and what they are meant to be are imposed by society and their own mind, but not by God. And that which helps us overcome our limitations is the understanding that God loves us and that frees us to love God and humankind. It is so profoundly simple and obvious that it's so easy to take for granted. Just because this message is deceptively clear, however, doesn't mean love is an easy thing to define. What makes the term love so difficult to define is how easily love can be misconstrued if it is defined incorrectly. What I mean by that is if someone doesn't understand what love means, they will worship those things that destroy what love seeks to accomplish. I would like to spend a few more minutes speaking about this before attempting to define what love means. That which we worship that doesn't lead us back to God's love is as old as this text and even before that. They are wealth, fame, beauty, power, and knowledge. The opposite of what Jesus and the apostles are representing. Please notice that I am not saying that taken in and of themselves or any combination thereof, that these are bad things. What I am saying is that worshiping and serving them will always make you feel less than and never enough. And that is the paradox each of these forms of worship. They do the opposite of what is intended. Take our wealth and possessions, for example. We live in a capitalist society where wealth and money are idealized and often worshiped. There are dedicated schools of thought to investing, mathematical models on the time value of money, structural valuations, compound interest, and risk management. There are even cultic sites where the faithful go to worship, such as the NYMEX, ICE, CME, and NASDAQ. And then there are the modern-day apostles of this faith. These industrial titans put their names on buildings and claim to hold key beliefs that will enrich all of their followers. The point I'm trying to make is not that having money or wealth is bad, but how foolish and short-sighted the worship of money and wealth is. This is the paradox. If you worship money and possessions, then you will never have enough. Eventually, your money and possessions own you, and you will die an impoverished death. This is the truth. Likewise, if we value fame and attention, then we will constantly put ourselves in compromising and embarrassing scenarios to fill the void left behind in a world without love. Nowhere is this more obvious to me than the modern-day narcissistic behavior unleashed by social media and vanity masquerading as likes. Instead of affirming our inner beauty and wholeness, social media has left a generation empty and bereft of value outside of external validation. It has pandered to our most vain and basic desires of our ego while leaving us empty on the inside. Instead of seeking validation from within and searching for authenticity and meaning in the natural world, we end up creating larger and larger voids in our heart that no amount of fame nor attention can fill. Worship fame and attention, and you will always feel insignificant. There will never be enough likes, nor will you ever find inner peace. A corollary to fame and attention is the desire to maintain the cultural aesthetics of beauty. We have heard the cliche phrase that beauty is only skin deep, But that hasn't prevented us from trying to restore our bodies to a distorted perception and an aesthetic of beauty that can never be reached. The idea that beauty is something that can be defined externally and will make a person happy is one of the more disturbing myths that is supported and sustained by a multi-billion-dollar advertising, cosmetics, and health industry. If you worship their ephemeral aesthetics of beauty, you will always feel ugly, you will suffer from body dysmorphia, and never accept growing old. You'll be caught in a paradoxical nightmare where you seek to revive a graveyard of your aging body, and you will always feel ugly and unloved. Then there is power, another form of worship that leads to a paradoxical disaster. If there's anything I've learned from politics over the last couple of years, is that the desire to have power is based on the fear of being insignificant. Please understand that I'm not basing this on a particular person, political party, or a specific country. I will let your mind wander where it has to go in order to make the specific point. My point is simply this. If you worship power, it is because you feel insignificant. The more insignificant you feel, the more weak and afraid you become, and the more power you crave. And on the problem grows. Finally, and this one hits closer to home for me, there is the worship of knowledge. What I mean by this is not the pursuit of wisdom or understanding, but knowledge that serves to validate our intellectual superiority. If we worship our intellect, we will always feel stupid and unoriginal. We can adorn our lectures with conversations with wonderful quotes taken from obscure text, from passages across time, to impress our knowledge upon those who have the misfortune of hearing it. This, however, doesn't make us original thinkers, nor does it do anything to address the suffering human condition. We are just regurgitating known narratives and ignoring age-old problems that still haven't been solved. Paradoxically, the more we worship our intellect, the more ridiculous we feel and further detached from reality we become. Things change, and therefore so can we. What will help us change is redefining the term love. In fact, one might say that how we currently define love is one of the more preternatural problems of the English language. This was something I learned in high school when our teacher had us sit in a college philosophy class. I can't recall the exact context in which the subject of love arose. I do remember, however, something the professor said that has stuck with me to this day. He noted how people use the word love in a variety of conflicting and diverse ways. For example, someone may mention how much they love cheeseburgers, as grease is dripping down from their chin as they greedily chomp into a burger. The Texans, as they violently beat up another team. Their significant other, with a lustful look in their eyes. Or their children, when they're really just living vicariously through them. Love, when applied to each of these categories, belies the intensity and deep richness of that term. This has had very real implications on how Jesus' message of love has been misinterpreted in the English language. Quite simply, we've denuded the term and lost our ability to understand what love means. This passage helps us recover that meaning. If it isn't mentioned in our pericope directly, it is definitely implied. What Jesus means by love is the giving of your time and presence freely shared in service of God and humankind. It was this message of love that radicalized the apostles to heal the broken world in which they lived. This concept of love allowed them to break free from the societal confines that limited their ability to live authentic, meaningful lives in service to a higher cause. The same understanding of love is relevant for us today. To put it simply, there is no gift greater than love freely shared in service of God for humankind. It is the gift that surpasses any monetary value or possession, the memory that lasts throughout time, the gift that reflects her inner beauty, the power that tears down all walls, and the wisdom greater and deeper than any knowledge. This definition, passed along from Jesus to the apostles down to all of us today, authenticates our existence and provides meaning where there is emptiness. This, I am convinced, is what Jesus' prayer taught his disciples. This takes me back to the line I quoted in the beginning of the sermon. They do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. What Jesus is saying is the obvious important reality that nothing is permanent outside of love. Love for God, love for God's creation, and for humankind, and by our humble service to all. Love can't be held, nor can it be monopolized. Love is not what you own, your fame, your power, your beauty, or your knowledge. Love stands in contrast to all of that, and that the more you share, the more love you share, the better you feel, and the world becomes a better place. To give is to love, and to love is to give. If you aren't there yet, that's okay. It took the apostles a quick minute to figure it out themselves. I freely admit that I am learning this too. It is okay if you need time to figure out how to redefine love for your path as well. No matter where you are in your life journey, you can start again. You can always start again. The universe begins at dawn, and it does so every day. Now go out, be loved, share love, feel love. And this is going to sound weird after I've spoken for 15 minutes on this issue. Don't overcomplicate it. Just love.